Welcome to the Open Forum in the Villages, Florida. In this show, we talk to leaders of clubs and interesting folks who live here in the Villages to get perspectives of what is happening here in the Villages, Florida. We are a listener-supported podcast. There will be shout-outs for supporters in episodes.
This is Mike Roth. And listeners, I'm thrilled to share with you this podcast, which is my passion project for you. This podcast brings you knowledge, inspiration, and a lot of things that people need to know about the villages and the people living here. Be sure to hit the follow button to get the newest episode each week. Creating this podcast is a labor of love, even though it demands more time I can easily spare. Now, here's where you come in. You can help us keep the podcast alive and thriving. How? By becoming a supporter. The easy way for you to support us is to visit our podcast webpage, openforuminthevillagesflorida.com, and click on the supporter button at the top of the page, or the purple supporter box. Even a small donation of $3 to $10 a month makes a big difference, and you can cancel your subscription at any time. Your support means the world to us. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep those headphones on. I hope everyone enjoys today's show. This is Mike Roth on Open Forum in the Villages, Florida. I'm here today with Bobbie Calhoun. Bobbie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here.
Good. Bobbie is a produced playwright, a published essayist, poet, and a debut novelist. Her essays appear in Storied Stuff and Medium, and her COVID-inspired essay, Rewiring the Wormhole, was voted top 20 most read essays by Talking Writing Literary Magazine. How many years have you actually been writing, Bobbie?
I've really only been writing about 10 years. I know it was something I've wanted to do for a very long time. I studied math in college. I think that poetry is pretty mathematical, but I just started to understand that math is a language, another language to learn. And I did feel inspired by it in the beginning before I started trying my hand at writing a novel. A bit of a foolhardy exercise, but the debut will come out and we'll see how it goes.
So this is your first novel?
Yes, and I chose the historical fiction genre to work in.
How many books a year did you read before you decided to write your novel?
I probably between 5 and 10 books a year, not a lot, but I would curate what I wanted to read very carefully. I was trying to, especially as I started the novel, I was trying to read a lot of historical fiction, but then I found myself branching out into biographies of some of the real people that my characters were inspired by. I think I've read a fair amount of the bestsellers that are in my genre and surrounding biographies and factual histories.
Was there a creative spark that led you to crafting the fiction that eventually became Folio, the novel?
That's a funny story. There was a friendly argument going on between my husband and son at the kitchen table pretty much every night. My son was in arts high school, and my husband is an artist, a BFA degreed sculptor who then went into photography. And they would argue all the time about who took the better picture that day. So they would go out and both take photos of Mount Hood, because we were out in Oregon, or any kind of photos, and they would have a friendly but bit of a rivalry around who took the better photo of that sunset or that scene, who had the better angle, who utilized the light better, who had the better equipment. And it was really interesting. And one day the idea popped into my head. I wondered if war photographers had that same debate sitting in some mess hall somewhere, if they were talking about things they were photographing in a military setting, if someone had a better photo. And that was the impetus for the book.
Your novel Folio is set among a number of real events and historical figures. What was the process that you used?
When you're writing fiction, you do get a bit of license to reimagine things and maybe put things in that don't happen. But I felt very tied to real events, especially since in this novel where I was depicting 3 different theaters of war, because the novel covers quite a few decades. So my characters meet each other in occupied France in 1943. So I had to do a lot of research on World War II, particularly that year and in that place, in that specific theater. And then they travel to Korea for the Korean conflict in the 50s and then the beginning of the Vietnam War. So a lot of research, reading a lot of books, but also talking to people, especially it was not hard to find war photographers who had traveling exhibits in Portland or other places, and you speak to the photographer. I also talked to a lot of veterans. There are actually a lot of veterans here, as we know, in the villages who were willing to talk to me about Vietnam. Some of the folks I talked to had actually had a war photographer or a photojournalist embedded with them, traveling around, and they had an opinion about that, what they were doing and whether they were helpful and whether they were telling the real story. So I really did it. I talked to people and I did my own research and I learned a lot of things. There were a lot of things that came out that were unexpectedly interesting, which was the role of Kodak in our military surveillance from the very, very early years of Kodak when George Eastman was at the helm. Right from the beginning, Kodak was interested in helping with aerial reconnaissance photography, developing the large format film, developing some of the cameras. And then right on through, as we know, they were very instrumental in NASA's program, the Apollo program and other space programs. And so that ended up becoming a pretty thick thread through the book. It's a little bit of a love story for Kodak. And my character works at Hawkeye Works, which was a blackout windowed lab up in Rochester, New York. And I made a trip to Rochester and I got a tour and of as much of the facilities as we could, and talked to people who had worked at Kodak in the 80s. That was another big part of the book that started to emerge.
So as you were doing this, did you unearth any stories or factual incidents that you incorporated into the book?
Definitely the aerial reconnaissance I did incorporate into the book. I have a character who works for Lockheed, but is also close to Kodak. So you know that there's this relationship there.
A skunk squirk,
yeah.
Lockheed guy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I learned a lot about cameras and having the right camera in the right place, in the right time settings. I learned about Nikon F being the camera in Vietnam. So I made sure my character is carrying that. But there was a lot of really interesting information out there about the very early cameras that were used in the 40s. And you have the speed graphics, and some of these cameras were so iconic. I went to a lot of different camera shops. There's one in Portland called Blue Moon that these guys know everything. And you would go in and talk about something and they'd be like, oh, no, it's not that camera. It's this camera. And then they would take it out from the case and show me how they used it. And there was one gentleman I talked to several times whose uncle was a war photographer in Korea. So he could tell me, and his uncle had told him all these stories. So I think just getting close to the human stories of what it's like when folks put themselves in harm's way in a military environment, and the respect you have to show for not just the person, but also what they carried. And so all of those incidents made their way into the book in large or small ways.
When you classify this as a spy type of a novel?
One of my characters is married to a spy. I needed a way to kind of maneuver him into all the places he went, especially in World War II. You really had to have a lot of clearance to travel around Europe, as I do have my character do. In talking to military professors and veterans, there was a way. If someone was affiliated to intelligence, they could get to be in a certain place at a certain time and take a certain photo. Robert Capa utilized the clearances that he had. And yes, I think that just all of that type of learning came through in the research that I did. And I feel that I was able to sprinkle a lot of this right through the novel and make it feel more realistic.
Okay, we're going to take a short break here and listen to Dr. Craig Curtis talk about Alzheimer's disease for a moment. Dr. Curtis, what is the diagnostic process to split the difference between someone who has Alzheimer's and someone who has a different form of dementia?
That's a great question, Mike. Alzheimer's disease in the past was a clinical diagnosis. And we would talk to the patient and the family, and they would tell us about this progressive memory loss and maybe other symptoms that had been occurring over the past 3 to 5 years. And we would simply test their memory and maybe wait another year or two and retest their memory to look for decline. Nowadays, it's completely different. As a matter of fact, now our diagnostic process involves actually looking for amyloid in the brain, which we now know causes Alzheimer's disease.
How do you see amyloid in the brain?
We can see amyloid in the brain using PET scans, which is the most common way. And now we're working on using blood tests, which are going to be coming out in the next few years. In fact, there's already one blood test that is FDA cleared to detect amyloid in the blood, which is reflecting amyloid in the brain.
And that would be the differential between another type of dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yes, sir.
With over 20 years of experience studying brain health, Dr. Curtis's goal is to educate the Villages community on how to live a longer, healthier life. To learn more, visit his website, craigcurtismd.com, or call 352-500-5252 to attend a free seminar.
Welcome back. Bobbie, Folio, which is the name of your book, is a little unusual in that it has two narrators from different generations and different genders. Why did you choose to have two narrators?
That was an interesting evolution as well. I mentioned that the impetus for the story was this mini rivalry going on between my husband and my son, that translated into the two main characters, Tusley and Plum, who are rivals. But not long into the story, as I started writing it, another voice started to appear out of my imagination, and it was this third voice. And it turned into the grown daughter of one of the photographers, Tusley's daughter, Katie. And she just kept wanting to talk. About every 2 or 3 chapters, she had something to say, and she was talking from her today, which was November 1983, and about the impact of her father not being around and the impact of the photographs themselves. They had a huge impact on one of her younger brothers who went off to war, volunteered at a very young age. His decision based in large part on the heroic images he saw in his father's and other war photographers' work. She really represents us. And in doing that, it added a lot more complexity to the book, because being a first-time novelist, even though I'm a poet and an essayist, it was like, oh no, I have 2 voices. They're talking in 2 different time zones. And so I had to do a lot of research. So even though I lived in 1983, I graduated college in 84, you don't realize how much you forgot about what it was like and how different it is from modern today, right? Mm-hmm. She was very interesting to include and have her tell us her side of the story, if you will.
What was the biggest challenge in writing the narration in 2 voices?
Making sure that they didn't sound alike is always, no, they had 2 different genders. It was a father and a daughter, so that wasn't as hard, maybe as it would be in another type of story. But it was making sure that only one of them knew what one of them knew, and the other one knows what the other one knows. And you have to make sure that she doesn't suddenly know something that only her father knows. She wasn't there. She only knows about his stories from what he's told her or what she's seen in the photographs. So I'd say that was the biggest challenge, was just making sure the characters stayed distinct and true to the time zone they were in.
The recurring concept in your novel seems to be the idea that that what you're looking at may not be real, such as staged wartime photographs. Yes. While Folio takes place in the 20th century, did our current events influence that narrative in your decision-making and writing?
Yes. And that's the challenge with writing historical fiction. Things can happen. You think if you have it all nice and pat, I'm going to set this in 1943. I'm going to set this in 1953. And then all these things happen in the news that you can't ignore. And in my case, I was well into the novel, because I started it around 2015, 2016, when fake news, the whole idea of fake news, slowly started to emanate. And it made the idea behind my novel of whether what we're seeing is truth or fiction much more come to the forefront than even maybe the rivalry. And that's why I think Katie's voice started to get louder and louder, because she had a sibling who was making decisions based on what he was seeing and hearing. So absolutely, the events related to fake news, things that were happening with journalists in the news, the things that were happening with censorship in the news, all of that definitely informed the book as I continue to write it.
The whole idea of fake news goes back a long time.
It does. And it wasn't really in the public consciousness until really, I would say at that time, it was starting to become its own topic.
If you go backwards, Orwell's 1984,
Yeah.
wasn't it about
Absolutely.
rewriting history?
Yes.
And didn't the Soviets do that in 1918?
Yeah. And so that's why writing historical fiction is such a challenge, because what do your characters know? So if you're staying within the boundaries of it is this year, not today, but you still want the novel to be relevant to your modern reader, you have to figure out how to dance around that.
Your novel seems to cover or spend a lot of time looking through the years, through the eyes of professionals in the field of photography. What is your motive of going to the camera analogy in the book?
I would say the motive was to explore, as a person who now holds a camera in my hands almost 24 hours a day, right? It's on the bedstand next to you, right?
It's in the phone.
It's in your phone. And I really wanted I wanted to think about what that meant. The ability to capture an image and the idea that what you're looking at may not be what you think it is. And then the photo itself, of course, could be doctored, right?
Today it's pretty easy.
Yeah. So I think that was really the goal, was to say, hey, this is an object that at one time was one thing, and now it's evolved to this other thing. And what does that mean for us? And what does it mean for the decisions that we make based on especially war photography? And photography itself is visceral. You have a visceral reaction to it. You could read a story, it takes you a while to absorb it, an article, a story, an essay. But when you look at a photograph, you will have an instant reaction to it. And what is it? And how much can you rely on that?
Yeah, we take in a lot of information through our eyes.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, you mentioned that you have your camera on the bedstand in the form of your phone. Do you own a real camera?
I do not. I am surrounded by cameras in my house. You can just imagine, between my husband and my son, and then besides their digital cameras, and my son is interested in film as well. So there's all kinds of camera equipment all around us. I myself, just to keep it simple, and I keep it to the iPhone. That's my favorite camera.
Okay, digital camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The most simple one they make.
Yeah. I can't think of the year between 92 and 2017,
right,
when I left Cincinnati. But I remember going into a camera shop to buy a new digital camera. And the gentleman in the store said, "No, Mike, you don't want to buy a digital camera that's not taking with enough pixels."
Yeah.
And a few years later, that went away. The digital cameras did have enough pixels to get a really good shot.
There was a lot of people calling the shots from a business perspective around digital photography, digital cameras. And as we know, Kodak
dropped the ball there.
Yeah, they dropped the ball. And that's why I think it was important to resurrect that image of Kodak that we have in the back of our minds, of being first, being amazing, being ubiquitous, right? That yellow and black logo, the people who worked there, how much Kodak was involved with a lot of the early days of not just cameras and photography, but the very idea that everyone should be able to take a picture. It's just as easy as take the photo and we'll develop it and give it back to you, and you'll have it right away. And I think that's really interesting, that there was a time when it wasn't like the way it is now. And recalling that was really fun.
You said film cameras around your house. Do your son or your husband actually develop their own film?
No, my husband and son have in the past, but today they do not. And I wouldn't say they're not trying to express any opinion with that. I think it's just that they find that the digital cameras work just really well for them. I think after a while, they didn't like the chemicals. I know my husband was like, the chemicals, they're dangerous, they're toxic. I have a lot of scenes in the book where my character is developing film, and I have him developing film in Korea. I have him developing film in a shed at home. The daughter remembers that, the acrid smell of the chemicals, the whole ritual of it, right? And the steps. And I interviewed folks closely on what you do and the red light and all of that. And I loved portraying that. It really was fun to visit that world.
I had a very close friend that developed his own film and even had an enlarger.
Yeah, it was really fun to go to these camera stores I was telling you about, like Blue Moon in Portland. they had all that stuff, right? Because there were all these hobbyists that came and were buying these cameras. They were pristine. They had been refurbished. And then, of course, they're buying all the accoutrements that you're talking about. And when you're walking around the store, you forget that's what people used to need to do, right? So it is really interesting. And that's why writing historical fiction is fun. You get to step into a different world. I think it's fun to write, period, because I have a lot of friends that write sci-fi, fantasy, you name it, spy novels, thrillers. I'm in a Florida Writers Association. We have a critique group that everyone's writing something different. I'm in the Writers League of the Villages. Everyone's writing something different. And it is so fun. And so I'm really honored to be part of that community.
Why did you write this particular novel?
I think it just wanted to be written. I myself have been a professional corporate person and had some ambition, which I was able to fulfill. So once I married up the idea of a photographer who I could base on people I knew, and that ambition and the rivalry that I've always thought was fun, a fun part of work, as long as it doesn't get evil, pretty fun. I felt the need to just express that. So that was from the personal side. When the character, the daughter, Katie, started to emerge, I realized there was a father-daughter story to tell there. My father was around all the time, so I didn't have an absent father, but it was interesting to explore a family dynamic that maybe I didn't personally experience, but I'd certainly had friends and relatives who had. And I don't know, I think when you write a novel, it's not a choice. It's something that inspires your imagination. And if you give yourself the time and put pen to paper, as all my colleagues do in my writing groups, you never know where it'll take you. And my husband laughs at me that he's like, you just like to make up people, make them say what you want them to say. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I do. It's the only place you can completely control.
Okay, so let's talk about how people can get a hold of a copy of your novel, Folio.
Folio is available everywhere books are sold, including Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and your local independent bookseller.
Now, your novel is self-published, okay? Why did you have a publishing company?
I made the decision that I wanted to control how it looked, how it was laid out. I hired a fantastic editor in New York, Judy Gittenstein, who has, I think, over 50 years experience with all the major publishing houses. So I hired her, and she became an incredible partner. And it was through that experience that I made the decision that I wanted to hire anyone that I would control the whole thing. And it's been really fun and a learning experience. And once you self-publish a novel, and I created a publishing company to do that, it's called Nouveau Literary, it could get picked up by someone else. There's a distinct possibility. It happens all the time. But whether or not that happens, I think I would have a better chance of getting the book into people's hands because it wouldn't be such an elongated process, which is very true of traditional publishing right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you thinking of turning your book into an audiobook?
Absolutely. I would love to do that. No, there's a fair amount of French-Canadian French, Parisian French, some German, circa 1943, and there's a little Korean in the book. So when I get to a audiobook, I will have to do some pretty heavy interviewing. And the book is told from two perspectives, as I said, a father and a daughter, so I'll decide on how to handle that. As I said, I might have bitten off more than I can chew for a first book, but I would love to do an audiobook, and I think it would lend itself really well to audio.
Yeah, audio gets more complicated.
Yeah.
The more voices you put into it.
So if we did a single voice but had someone who could articulate the language easily, I think it would be really fun to do.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add, Bobbie, that we haven't covered today?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, Mike, and hopefully folks will buy the book.
Good. Thanks very much, Bobbie.
Thank you, Mike.
Remember, our next episode will be released next Friday at 9 a.m. Should you want to become a major supporter of the show or have questions, please contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. This is a shout out for supporters. Tweet Coleman, Ed Williams, Duane Ramich, Paul Sorgan, Kathy Loving, and Dr. Craig Curtis at K2 in the Villages. We will be hearing more from Dr. Curtis with short Alzheimer's tips each week. If you know someone who should be on the show, contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. The way our show grows is with your help. Text your friends about this show if you enjoyed listening, or just tell your friends about the show. We thank everyone for listening to the show. The content of the show is copyrighted by Roth Voice 2025. All rights reserved.